Well, good morning, everyone. To the people here that are here in person in Kamloops and to all of you online. Welcome to the opening session of the Big Data in Ag Symposium. My name is Murray Fulton, and just a very quick word of introduction on my part. I am a professor in the Johnson Shyama Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Saskatchewan. As you know, I think this is why you're sort of here today, primary production agriculture is changing rapidly due to major developments in what we might call digital or smart technology. Roughly a year and a half ago, a group of us at the University of Saskatchewan, Professors Marc-Andre and Yang Yang, graduate student Bill Omichin, and myself, thought it was important to explore the issues that arise with the development of this new technology. Thanks to some funding that we got from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, we were able to obtain funding to undertake a synthesis of the research that has been done to date and to hold this conference. Today's event will share and mobilize information about this topic. It's going to draw on some of the work that we put together last summer. And then since then, we've managed to pull in just a wonderful group of resource people, and you're going to get a chance to hear from them today. The session this morning is really meant to kick off the rest of the day. It's to provide the context for what you're going to hear in the rest of the sessions. And we've got a great lineup of people to do this kickoff. And I'm going to just take a moment, introduce all three of our speakers, and then we're just going to go right through and they'll just go one by one. So let me start with Bill Omichin. Bill is a barrister and solicitor who practices law in both the United States and Canada. He is working as a senior research fellow in the Food Systems Security and Preparedness Group at the University of Wisconsin Law School. He is also a PhD student at the Johnson Shyama Graduate School, where he is doing his thesis on food systems risk and agricultural data governance. His previous positions, amongst a long line, was Director, Office of Preparedness and Emergency Healthcare in the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. Next, Dan Lucier. Dan is Project Manager for Agri-Food Data at Emily Canada. He is leading Emily's work to support the responsible use of data and data-intensive technology in the agriculture and food sector. Dan is a mechanical engineer by training and has previously worked in public policy for Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, Global Affairs Canada, and in advanced manufacturing at the University of British Columbia. And finally, Darcy Haraf is the director of the Ag Expert Division at Farm Credit Corporation, where he leads the team that creates solid and simple software solutions to help Canadian farmers digitize their farm records. Darcy was born and raised on a mixed farm in southeast Saskatchewan and attended the University of Regina, where he received a degree in business. Darcy also has a lifelong passion for farming and is actively operating the family farm. He currently sits on the boards of Ag Data Transparent, ADT Group, and Agri-Food Innovation Council. So that's our stellar lineup for this morning. And with no further avail, Bill, over to you.
Thank you, Murray. Good morning, everyone. Glad everyone's here, and I'm glad to be the leadoff batter. I'm sorry I'm using a baseball analogy in Canada where I was a hockey goalie, but baseball's starting up in the United States, and I'm very much into baseball. Go Minnesota Twins. But I'm very glad to be here, and I'm going to give a relatively broad overview of the agricultural data issue, and it's going to tie in very closely to the research and the report that we did at the University of Saskatchewan. But the first slide, and I don't know if I'll see it on the screen. Oh, there it is. Well, next slide after that. I guess I have the clicker, don't I? So I will control this. Hopefully I will control this. Okay. Hang on one second. Okay. Oh, there we go. Just want to acknowledge the sponsors both for the ag co-op session upstairs and also for our session here, and very much appreciate the support. All of the organizations that are acknowledged there were supporters of our various grant requests, which I'll talk about in a moment, to the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and we very much appreciate their support. I didn't do that, I don't think. Moving along. I should have said right at the beginning, this is live and unrehearsed. But so literally on my first day as a PhD graduate student at Johnson Shoyama at the University of Saskatchewan, Professor Fulton, Professor Pigeon, Marc-Andre Pigeon had me working on a grant proposal with Stan over here to my right to SSHRC. And we all had an interest, a strong interest in the ag data issue. And just a couple other little tidbits of my background. I served as what you would call the Deputy Minister of Agriculture for the state of Minnesota for about 8.5 years. And then I was what you'd call the Minister of Consumer Protection for the state of Wisconsin. I was the state's Chief Privacy Officer. So I've had a strong interest in data and privacy for a long time. And so I was very glad that they invited me to be a part of this project. But we did about 6 months of research, which resulted in the report, the front cover. And I think if you don't already have it, we can certainly make that report available to you. But looking at the next slide, you can see who the report researchers are, and Murray already identified them or identified us, so I'm not going to spend much time there, but it was a really robust research team, and it was a real privilege to be a part of that. As you can tell, I'm coming to my PhD a little bit later in life than typical, but it's been both very fun and rewarding. And I don't know where that came from, but looking at, again, live and unrehearsed. So looking at the digitizing agriculture, there are a lot of opportunities. And it's something that I want to stress right at the outset, because we talk a little bit about some of the potential issues and actually some of the real issues with digitizing agriculture, but there are a lot of opportunities. But first, how does this work? And some of you who are farmers know directly how it works. I milk cows, and on those cows are ear tags, and we have robotic milkers as well. And so there's the smart devices in both the ear tags and the robotic milkers. So we know the temperature of the cow. So if we see a spike in temperature of the cow, we know that they may have mastitis or some other type of livestock disease. If they aren't going to the robotic milker at the right schedule, then we might have both. We know how much milk is being produced, but we also know just from a frequency perspective that there might be an issue from that cow. And so all this data is being collected on the dairy farm that I work on. But at the same time, when we're out in the fields planting corn, soybeans, wheat, whatever, in the planters, we're seeding, there's data that knows we know the profile of the farm because that's already been loaded in. And so we know how much seed to put in what location, depending on the soil type, soil condition. When we're going out and harvesting, it's collecting data on how much we're producing in which part of the several thousand acres of fields. On and on. I think you get the idea. There's just a lot of data that's being collected. And we tie that into weather data as farmers. Weather is awfully important, because who else in the world will take a risk on spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on ag inputs every year, not knowing whether they're actually going to have something produced? And farmers do that. And as you all know, but we just collect a lot of data on that right side. It goes through a system. And again, I'm putting this all very simply, but it gets aggregated by various providers. These 10, the brands there, those are the top 10 digitizers of agriculture and agricultural data. And so you can see a number of the companies may be familiar to you, and other companies may not be familiar to you. But what they're doing is they're taking this vast amount of data, trillions of I got a terabytes or whatever. It's just a lot of data that's being collected. And they're using machine learning, using algorithms, making through predictive learning, making assessments on what is the right type of agriculture to be doing at the right place at the right time. And so a lot of this data is being provided back to farmers as raw data. But there's these companies, and you can see in the top right corner to you, Bayer. It's estimated owns about 52% or collects about 52% of the world's agricultural data. And so you have one company alone, and a lot of it was through Monsanto after they acquired Monsanto from St. Louis back about 5 years ago, but a huge holder of that ag data. So what are they doing with that data? A lot of different things. In one hand, they're saying we're using this data to better focus, target our products, whether it's seed, whether it's ag chem, other types of products. But at the same time, the CFO of Monsanto, right before the merger, said, we're really no longer an ag chem company, we're an ag data company. That's where the value of the company comes from. And that had a lot to do with why Bayer then acquired Monsanto, to get access to all of that data. And moving on to the next slide. And so there are, again, a lot of advantages. It's improving seeding techniques. It's reducing the use of pesticides and fertilizers. I was the both state of Wisconsin, state of Minnesota ag chem regulator. And the amount of ag chem being used on Wisconsin, Minnesota farm fields has fallen pretty dramatically with the resulting environmental benefits from that. We also a lesser use of fertilizer, particularly in Minnesota and Wisconsin, because there's 2 million dairy cows. The principal source of fertilizer is dairy manure, but in Minnesota, it's synthetic fertilizer. It's reduced a lot of the fertilizer use, and it's really improved on-farm management. And because we're not as farmers not expending as much for ag inputs because we're doing it in a much more intelligent way. But there are some issues that come from this. And what are those issues? Is that the best way for me to focus on or point towards the screen? Towards you, that's what I thought, but it seems to work when I point that way. Anyway, go figure. But there are some issues that are associated with digitizing agricultural data. Privacy is certainly an important issue, and as I already disclosed, I have a personal interest in that. The security of the data. Data ownership, that's a pretty significant issue as a barrister, a solicitor, as a regulator. I have to say, I've done a lot of research in this area, and Murray, Marc-Andre, and I are working on an additional research paper on this. It's not at all clear who really owns that data. It's an area of the law. I have searched through thousands of court cases in the United States, all the way from the United States Supreme Court down to the state Supreme Courts. And I found 2 reportable decisions that had any type of decision that related into the ag data area and ownership. Data portability, as farmers, we've interviewed a lot of farmers, particularly in Saskatchewan, but in other parts of other Canadian provinces. And they say, we're kind of afraid to change who our ag input suppliers are, ag chem, because once we have the data on our smartphone and we decide to switch to someone else, we're not sure if we're going to be able to actually transfer that data over so that we have historical data on our farming operation. Market power. I already talked about Bayer, pointing back over my shoulder to the slide that no longer there, but imagine the kind of market power that Bayer has, having 52% of the world's agricultural data. And then lack of farmer trust. And this isn't uniform, and this is mostly anecdotal of the farmers that we interviewed, but there was just a lot of skepticism that digitizing ag data in the end would really benefit them as agricultural producers. And there's some polling that's been done. Thank you. Polling that's been done, and some interesting statistics there, but Farm Credit Canada, Darcy's entity, Crown Corporation, 65 to 70% found that information technology is useful, and I want to continue emphasizing that, or beneficial. But there is a subset, 25%, that are less comfortable sharing data, again, for those privacy security issues. American Farm Bureau, which is the leading farmer level organization in the United States, 77% of their farmer members express concerns about entity accessing the data without their knowledge. So if there's been consent and they know the company is getting their data, they're more comfortable with that. But the flip side is they believe 77% that companies are accessing data without their consent. And then there was also a survey done in Australia, and you can see 56% had little or no trust data would be kept private. And this has been somewhat mimicked actually in large part by studies that have been done in the European Union of European farmers. So what's been the industry response? And we'll have more of this later on today. This is just a quick overview, and then we'll have those who are heavily involved in this efforts talk about it. But in the United States, there's the ag data transparent issue, or ag data, sorry. There's a Ag Data Transparent Certification Project, began in 2014. The person who's administering it will be talking a little bit later today, but that led to a voluntary effort within the United States to provide some voluntary standards that companies could agree to live to in security and others, and then be certified for that. In New Zealand, it's the Farm Data Code of Practice. Again, a 2014 effort. Australia Farm Data Code, that's 2020, so a bit more recent. And then the European Union has their Code of Conduct for Agricultural Data Sharing 2018 effort. And Canadian Digital Charter Implementation Act, that's the only law that we could see in Canada that really had any possible overlay or input in this area. So let me talk very briefly about just some of the core principles that we've been seeing in these voluntary programs. In education, emphasizing the education of producers on ag data, but also those that are getting the data from them and taking that data and aggregating it. The ownership, trying to work out the ownership issues on that. Collection, access, and control, providing additional information and safeguards on that. Notice when data is being collected, because again, a lot of farmers said they don't know if this data is being collected from them. Transparency and consistency, choice, portability, terms and definitions. That might sound like not terribly exciting, but if you spend a lot of your life like I have in public policy, writing statutes, enforcing statutes, definitions are crucial in that. Disclosure, use, and sale limitations. If your company gets bought out by others, because the list of 10 that I showed there, that hasn't changed a lot, but the data providers continually change because of mergers and acquisitions in that area. Contract termination, how can I go about terminating my contract? Unlawful or anti-competitive practices, and then liability and security safeguards. So these 13 areas are focal points for these voluntary data programs. There are some policy considerations and that we have been studying at the University of Saskatchewan. Data portability, and I've already talked about that. Interoperability, so if I use a particular type of software for my data, can I communicate with a different set of software so that I have more value than just the one that I got from my particular input supplier? We already talked about the Digital Charter Implementation Act, which is in the process of development here in Canada in front of Parliament, and looking at what aspects of that might play into this debate. Property rights. As an attorney, I have been involved in property rights litigation for 35 years. And I'm starting to come to the conclusion that maybe property rights doesn't really apply legally in this area, which has got Marc-Andre a little bit surprised when I say that. And Murray, I don't know if I've ever said that to you. So you're going to think I'm pretty radical, but as I research the case law, not sure property rights are going to apply in the way that they typically do when you have something that you own. And then the last thing that we're going to want to talk about, and part of this discussion tomorrow, is data cooperatives and whether there's a role here. So where do we go from here? So we have the SSHRC Connections Grant. That's why all of you are here today. That's why you're here at the Ag Data Symposium. We have a workshop for a smaller group tomorrow, but I think the University of Saskatchewan is committed to continuing being involved in this issue for the long term. And I look forward to having a robust discussion about this later today. With that, thank you very much.
Bill, thank you very, very much. Our next, let me just pause before we go on to our next speaker. I think Bill's presentation has given everyone a very good idea of the complexity of this particular issue. Now, to drill down into some of those issues in a bit more depth, Darcy Harraf is up next, and then Dan after him. And I won't come back up between the next two of you. You can just transition from one to the next.
Does work. All right. Morning, everybody. Thanks for, big thanks to Murray and the organizing group for asking me to come today. I really appreciate the invite and looking forward to the discussion. And good job, Bill, really laying out, I think, some of the foundational challenges and opportunities in ag data. So I'll talk a little bit just about who FCC is. For those of you that don't know, we are a federal crown corporation. We were founded in 1959. And we're unique in that we only are active lenders in the agriculture and agri-food industry in Canada. So we have 101 offices spread across the country, coast to coast. And we're 100% invested in Canadian agriculture and food. So ag expert. So I get to lead the ag expert team, and we're part of Farm Credit Canada. We're the farm management software division, really, of the company. As Murray said in my intro, I have a simple goal, and that's just to help Canadian farmers digitize their farms. Part of the challenge of that is everything that Bill just laid out before me. And I'm going to go into, a couple or three of those opportunities I see them. And I know they're opportunities and challenges, but I kind of see them as opposite sides of the same coin. So, and I like to talk about opportunities. So I'm going to frame these more an opportunity. And I think trust is the number one opportunity that we have as ag tech providers, and I'm also a farmer. So I see both sides of that. But I think trust is paramount to making all of this work. And if we don't have trust, it's going to be really hard to help our farmers digitize and get advantages for using these digital tools. And the advantages are immense. And I think without going into it too much, hopefully we get some questions about it. I think, I strongly believe that, Canadian farms have to embrace these digital tools and across the industry and across different value chains and segments of the Canadian ag industry. The other thing I want to talk a little bit or leave you with is about shared value. So how do farmers participate and get shared value in these value chains, not feeling like something's being taken from them? This data is, it's very near and dear to farmers. And I think as an ag tech provider, we have to make sure that farmers get to participate as equal partners in these value chains. And the other thing I'll talk a little bit about is just the tools that we create have to be solid and simple. They have to work where farmers need them to work, and they have to be simple enough that it allows easy data entry. And I know, data comes from machines and IoT devices, but a lot of this foundational data we're finding comes still from big thumbs on small screens. And we have to make tools that are easy enough and simple enough to understand so that our growers and our customers can use them. So I'll talk a little bit about trust. And you can see I put the Ag Data Transparent seal on there. I am very fortunate to sit on the board of Ag Data Transparency. We like to call it an international certification. I'm very proud to be that Farm Credit Ag Expert was the first Canadian headquartered company to achieve their Ag Data certification. But it's pretty simple in my mind. And you might notice I like to talk in threes and simplify everything because that's how I get to understand it. So to me, it's pretty easy. Say what you do and do what you say, and say it in clear, easy to understand speak that anybody can understand. And as I mentioned, I think there's a huge promise on ag technology across all segments, of agriculture. And agriculture is big. There's a ton of different segments. There's a ton of different sectors. It's not, across the industry. And I think, data is going to help everybody improve and, produce more food, get more market access, do things more efficiently. But without trust and transparency, I think it's going to be hard. I'm not going to talk too much about ADT as we have Todd Jansen, who's the administrator, coming up sometime this morning, and he'll do a much better job than I am. The other thing that I like to talk about is trust both as a farmer and an ag tech provider. I'd like to ask a lot of questions about it. And I think we have to answer them as an ag technology provider. So who owns the data? Our position at Ag Expert is the customer, the farmer owns the data. They entered it, it's their data. We protect it, and we're very transparent about how it's being used. And we give our customers the right to share it or not share it, or share it and remove the right to share it. But I think that's important that we're transparent with it. And if other, it's okay that other ag technology providers might have a different view on that. It's just, we'd like them to be very transparent about it. And we think that's, as a farmer, then if I'm using a tool, at least I know what I'm signing up for, and it's in clear speak. I can understand it. And there's no, not a year or 2 or 3 years into it, I don't have any big surprises. Egg data value chains, I think Dan's going to talk a little bit about them as well. But when these value chains are digitized, it adds value to the whole process. And what we'd like to do is just make sure that our customers can participate in those egg data value chains. Doesn't mean they get an equal share, but their share has to be transparent and has to be, you have to be able to show how they get and achieve that value. And then if they're using these tools and they're trusting these companies to share their data, what's the trade-off? There's always a trade-off, right? These companies, these ag tech providers like myself, we do have to make money and be profitable. But how do we do that with our customers is kind of the challenge. And are we clear about that? The other thing that's important, and I know Bill talked a little bit about it, is that transportability or the right to leave. So if I've spent years invested in entering my data into I'll use my own Egg Expert field, and I get tired of Egg Expert field, hopefully I never do, but I want to leave, what does that mean from all the data, the years of data that I have on my fields and my operation in there? Can I leave? Can I take my data with you or with me? I think that's an important thing when we're talking about trust. And then express consent. So one of the things that is big, just starting to become bigger, is can I share my data with another system I use? So we know we have research that farmers use between 2 and 4 applications, just like normal consumers. I don't run my house on one app. I usually have a few. But if I want to use and I need to use multiple applications, do I have to re-enter the data, the same data 4, 5, 6 times? If I want to apply for crop insurance and I have all the data in Egg Expert Field or in Climate Field View or Farmer's Edge, can I just take that data and enter it into my crop insurance application? It's there, I have it. It would save me a ton of time. So there's things like that, but we want to make sure if farmers can do that, they know they check a button and say, yes, I consent to share this data with this other provider, with this other company. I think that's very important to make farmers, to make our customers feel that they still have control and ownership of their data. The other thing I want to talk a little bit about today is shared value. And I think, it's a really important concept when we're creating partnerships with our customers and they're trusting us to share their data, that the value that they get for doing it is expressed and they understand it. So how do we define that value? Is it, and it's different for everybody. For us, it's, we want to create different types of benchmarks and tools and improve our platform. And we're very clear about that, hey, we want to use the aggregated data set to build new tools and give farmers new opportunities, especially around benchmarking. And in that way, as a customer, if they click to use our tool, they know exactly what they're signing up for and they know what value they're going to get. And the other thing with that we talk a lot about value is we can't introduce 3 new problems, and I'll talk about this with Solid and Simple, but don't introduce 3 new problems by solving 1. That's not value for anybody. And that's where we talk a lot about Solid and Simple and making sure that what we're doing is actually adding value on the farm. The other thing, when we chatted a little bit about, there's these larger egg data value chains coming up. A lot of it is about food provenance. We talk a lot about farm to fork. I think farmers should be partners in those value chains. And right now, and I'll put my farmer hat on. Sometimes it feels like we're giving that value away and other members of the value chain get get all of the advantage for it. And I don't want to, I step back from saying equal partners, but let's make sure that our farmers are partners in these value chains and they get to participate and they understand what value they get for their data. It could be in higher prices. It could, but whatever it is, let's just make sure that we can explain that and we can, both as a farmer and an egg technology provider, we understand how we're partners in that value chain. And the last thing, and I drill this into my team a lot, is Solid and Simple. So, if your tools are so complex and they don't use language that your customers or farmers understand, you're just going to get garbage data in there that means nothing for anybody. So we focus a lot on creating solid and simple tools that use language that our farmers can understand so that we optimize, the ability for farmers to enter the correct data at the right time. And that doesn't matter if it comes from machine derived data or not. sometimes machine derived data can be the best or worst, depending on who's operating that machine and how it's set up. We always want our customers to be able to, even if it's machine derived, to be able to, do some quality assurance in that data and correct it if needed. The other thing I talk a lot about, and we drill it into our team, is that, most of these tools are available on mobile devices. So they have to work where farmers work. So outside, inside, dusty, greasy, bumpy, big thumbs, little thumbs. We have all types of ages of users across the board. And the other thing we have is some tech savvy, and I call them tech curious, maybe not as tech savvy as they could be, but they want to use technology. And our applications have to work for those people. Our customer base is 16 to 80. Right. And all of they're, most of the customers we talk to, and I have a 80-year-old that helps me out on my farm. He's the most tech savvy person I think I've ever met. But at the same time, he didn't grow up with the technology. So it has to be simple enough, for everybody to understand. And I talked a little bit about language. I think language is extremely important in these applications. If we're building tools that we want farmers to enter their production data, it better be in language that they understand. Because if you have to guess about what needs to go in that box, you've lost it. Like, you'll never get the right data, and it'll never work. The other thing with your agreements, and I encourage every farmer that I talk to please read our data usage agreement, ask questions about it, not just ours. If you're using other manufacturers or other companies' tools, read theirs too. Have your eyes open when you go into these. I know it's easy to just click that box and everybody does it. But one of the principles of ag data transparency is that, our ag data usage agreement is written in plain speak that anybody can understand. We maybe had some discussions with our legal team about that, but, they got there and they understood it. So, a quick recap, and then I'll pass it over to Dan. Trust makes this whole thing work. And how do we build that concept of trust? And I'm curious actually to talk more about co-ops and maybe the role that they have in that trusted ecosystem. I think we need to include our farmers as partners in ag data value chains. I think that's integral to making this work, to making sure they understand how they're partners and what that partnership means. And third, simplicity and transparency is a must. I think that goes, maybe without further explanation for me, but I think that's what makes all of this work. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dan.
Thanks a lot, Darcy. Just going to get this, or let them get the slides sort of organized here while I kick off. No, it's really wonderful to be here today. It's the first time I've been in person in a room with other people and not mediated exclusively by Zoom in 2 years. I know we're still broadcasting, and that's important. I know there's probably people who couldn't make it out to Kamloops today, but it's great to be here. My name's Dan Lucier. I lead a project at Emily that we call the Emily Data Initiative. And I'm going to try to build off of what both Bill and Darcy have already put out. They both did a great job of not only providing an overview, but I think putting their finger on some really important topics that I know will come up later today. We have lots of other sessions that will dive into some of those key areas. So I'm going to also try to lay a bit of high level, some groundwork, and then let the day sort of evolve. And I'd love to continue any of these discussions, in the hallways and over lunch and whatnot later today. So before I get too far along, just to tell you a bit about Emily, for those who don't know the organization, and a bit about the work we do in data. Emily is an industry-led organization based in Winnipeg, and our real mandate is to support the adoption, the use, and development of innovative, intelligent technologies in agriculture and food. So we have a number of different activities, including supporting startups and SMEs as they're developing maybe their first digital product. Also work with youth in terms of accessing training and learning opportunities, and then projects like the Data Initiative, which are, I guess, more subject matter driven. And we have others in water and a few other topics. So it's fun and diverse organization, but our base is really around this ag tech ecosystem. In terms of the Data Initiative, the project I'm leading, it's a newer one for Emily. We've been at it for just over a year now, and our main goal is really on building that strength and capability around data governance. And I like that terminology. I think it speaks to some of the challenges, but also the where we need to get to. We need, as different actors across the system, we want to be in a place where we are managing that system, we're engaging with the system, and it's well managed, well governed. And that way, some of the things Darcy was talking about occur, like trust, like shared value creation. We have doing a number of different things there. We have some technology demonstrations, some research. We're building some data literacy programming. I think it's just the beginning. This is such a rich area. There's a lot of work to be done. And I hope to draw lots of other people into this conversation through this event today, but also ongoing. So I'll go back one here. I don't want to spend too much time highlighting things that Darcy, or going back into what Darcy and Bill said. So hopefully there's some questions on that, but really just to say, I think they did tap onto so many of the different pieces that are important. And they laid out that optimistic point of view, which I think is got to be a starting point. There is things that can be done. There is real opportunity in terms of what this digital transformation can bring to the sector. It's a diverse opportunity, yes, on farm, but also in other areas of the sector. And I'm going to definitely talk about the on farm aspects. I think that's the heartbeat of a lot of this, because that's a big group of people and businesses. But we have to, my other argument to you today is going to be, we need to also look at that larger system, the value chain, the rest of the sector. How do we pull that package together, that larger ecosystem, so that we can get at some of this value and sort of get the most of the effort we're putting in the investment? So in terms of optimism, I think it's worth just thinking about where are we at? Where's this innovation? Where is the development of all these tools at? And I pulled a slide out of the graph on the screen there is pulled out of Ag Funders report, which came out this week for 2021, looking at investment in ag tech. And you can see it's pretty stark increase going on there, going back about 10 years. So that reflects a whole bunch of different technologies across a whole bunch of different pieces of the ag and food sector. But I think it's fair to say there's a growing interest, and that's really exciting. That means there's going to be new products, new ideas continuing to come into our sector. And with this transformation, we find, or with this investment, a lot of it is driven by software, right? That's a big part of where all this innovation and investment is coming from. And with software comes data, right? Those are things that are often conjoined twins in a lot of ways. But is it going to be just a easy, smooth ride right to the finish line? Hardly. I think we are going to have to surf the up and the down of the hype cycle, and we can see that there on the screen. We, in different areas of this, are going to ride up to a peak of growing expectations where everything is going to be easy and fun. And there is going to be some failure. There's going to be some products that don't make it. There's going to be some things that don't work. And that's okay. We have to be ready for that. We have to recognize that's part of finding out where value really exists and what things solve real problems. But on the other side of that, there can be, long-lived products and real enduring value that's created. So we just have to be ready for some things to sometimes not work, to be trial and error, and to keep persevering, because at the base, there is this larger trend occurring in terms of the digital transformation that is being bought into right across the board, from scientific research right through to products in the marketplace. Just one other observation before we get too far along was to try and situate what we're talking about in the context of the consumer internet that we're all familiar with. I'm sure most people in the room have a smartphone in their pockets. You can see some of the sort of blue chip brands that we interact with on a daily basis as consumers, but also Industry 4.0, which is sort of a grab bag term for the digitization of things like manufacturing and logistics. Well, I'm going to argue just in this moment that we should remember that we're talking about food production. We're talking about moving product towards maybe a consumer at the end of the day. In a lot of ways, what we're talking about resembles more Industry 4.0 and less maybe the consumer internet that we experience on a day-to-day basis. And that's not to say you throw away all of those things. A lot of our experiences there really matter because they set expectations. They influence a lot of the discourse. If you think about the way social media is and some of the disillusionment there has influenced the larger technology discussion. It's really important. But whereas in Industry 4.0, you're talking about businesses making business decisions and investments and buying services. Unfortunately, the reality is in consumer internet, we flip between different services. We try things for free. We agree to end use agreements without reading them. It's a very different world. And so we just need to be, recognizing there's elements of both aspects, but perhaps we should dig a little bit deeper into some of the industry 4.0, but also try to extract some learnings from that. We're not alone, right? Other sectors are going through digital transformations of their own and are learning lessons, and we should pull those things into what we're doing. And I'm sure I know we are. And at the base of that, we also need to think about what makes farm and food data a bit different. Food is something that the public cares about. We all need food. We all eat food. It brings up different reactions than pens, for example, which people are less emotive about. But also at the end of the day, farm data is also a bit unusual. It's maybe the owner has a long-lived personal connection to that land that data is about. It brings up different issues than either your Twitter account or perhaps your pen factory would. So all these things I think are relevant to where we're headed, and we need to reckon with those if we're going to achieve some of our end goals. So not to rehash all of this, Bill, we did a great job of laying out the big bins, but there's a whole bunch of these issues that to me, they surround the technology and the issue. And we're going to need to work on them. We know that. That's why we're kind of one of the reasons we're here today. Things like business models, cybersecurity, a really important issue that sometimes can be put to the side. Connectivity hasn't been mentioned yet today. Hard to use a lot of these tools unless you have network available. And that's not just 5G. I'm talking even more basic connectivity in a lot of whether it's rural Canada or I'm sure the rural United States. Artificial intelligence, in other areas of research and discourse, huge amount of work being done on trying to understand, is the model correct? What is the model built from? That's highly relevant to some of the recommendation engines that are driving farm management, tooling, and so on. So I don't want to dwell too much on any of these, but there's this range of issues that are a little bit less technological. They're social, they're business, they're legal, but they're going to matter in terms of whether or not we can make this larger ecosystem come together and be successful. So, at the end of the day, how do we move forward, and how do we create that value that that Darcy was really talking about? Well, it's one of the reasons that we started with the Emily Data Initiative, was to delve into some of those issues. But what I want to talk about in the last, I guess, half of my 10 minutes or so here today is what is a good lens and a framework to think about the larger sector. Because Darcy was talking a lot about the farm, and that's super important. And I totally agree with that. We have to start there. We have to make sure that farmer is a partner in this process and is well understood and served, and the product addresses their needs. And like Darcy said, doesn't create 3 problems to solve 1. All those things are fundamental. But at the end of the day, if we're only focused on that, a lot of the dominant narrative is on farmer and ag data or ag technology provider. That's data goes up, data comes down, data goes up, data comes down. Super important, but it's a small slice of a much, 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 much larger world. If you think about all the things that go into getting food into your hands, whether it's in food service or retail, that's a highly complex system. And there is a ton of value in that system that could be created through the integration of digital technologies in terms of efficiency, but also some of that idea of traceability and provenance that Darcy mentioned. But I'm sure a whole host of other things that we have hardly even started to scratch the surface on. And secondly, I'll also try to argue that the locking into the food product may be limiting in how we understand the architecture of this ecosystem. So if you take a look on screen, you can see the sort of the typical product value chain. In the most simplified context, you have a producer that initiates or originates a food product, and it might go into the logistics chain, it's transported, it's processed in some way, and ends up in retail. Eventually it ends up in your hands at the store or at a food service. And that is a super useful model to understand the progress of a food product or of a commodity in terms of how value is added and where we can make improvements to that that process. But in the context of data, it kind of hides a whole bunch of interactions that are happening that don't relate to food, that are between different actors in that chain and their various services and tools and providers and so on. And so instead of thinking just about that product value chain, maybe we need to pivot around and talk a little bit more about a data value chain, but also maybe also a data ecosystem, because I think it might be a little more 2-dimensional than linear. let me show you a little bit what I have in mind. So I've sketched out just a really coarse model of like centering on the grower and thinking about what are the tools that they might have around them they're diverse. You know, for example, if around them, you not only have maybe some farm equipment that's producing data, you have farm management software like Ag Expert and others. You may have some storage bins and so on that have sensors enabled. The farm no doubt uses email and other electronic systems. That is data as well, just for supporting the business operations. You have a whole bunch of other sources of information, imagery, so whether it's from satellite Earth observation, maybe drones and other forms of information, weather, soil tests. You might be backing this all up in the cloud. Underneath any of these services could be cloud infrastructure. And this is certainly one place where big technology companies make an appearance, whether they're visible or not. You know, ultimately, a lot of this still rests on top of Amazon and Google and Microsoft. And then even further zooming out, you have, you know, crop input companies that have their own technology systems. Downstream, you might have transport and logistics companies. Again, they have their own suite of data and software systems. And of course, you have other growers, the tens of thousands of other growers that are all out there with their own set of tools and so on, which may be contributing their own data, sharing it into the aggregations that are being gathered by different technology providers. So it's very complex, and it's not to be negative. It's a very complex but two-dimensional system where if we're going to actually try to access some of this potential value, and if we're going to like build that trust, and if we're going to, you know, ferret out some of the challenges that arise and the legal issues that need to be dealt with, we need to go in and through and probably a little bit more detailed mapping exercise of seeing where is the data relationships occurring, and not just where is the product moving between one entity and the next, because it is, I think, more dynamic and diverse. And I give a little, I guess, a little hat tip or so on to a great organization that works and has certainly helped my thinking on this is called the Open Data Institute out of the UK. And they have a whole sort of suite of tooling around how do you map data ecosystems. And I think if you haven't seen it, it's worth checking out. But my basic argument today is let's zoom out, let's think a little bit more broadly about this sector and all the data relationships that are arising. Let's use that as the window to find out where this value can be created, where challenges and risks arise, so that we can really understand, you know, what does that grower need? And let's keep in mind that grower is one of that 100,000 farm businesses and more that are out there who are in and of their own right, incredibly diverse, from huge grain and oilseed operation to a small market garden horticulture operator. But even inside of what might appear to be a similar farm business, two business owners or groups of owners might also be very different people. They may be different ages. They might have different appetites for technology and investment. They might be in a different place financially. And if we're going to understand those individuals, we need to place them inside of this system and make sure that we can get in touch with those different nodes of the network. I could have made the same argument anywhere else in the value chain. You know, if you look across the food system, you find a lot of other really small businesses, each of which have their own unique characteristics. So we need to do that work. And I think there's a real opportunity there if we do that to find value opportunities and to make sure that we're bringing in these different players and not just being stuck in a paradigm where it's, you know, individual business having a one-dimensional relationship with a tech provider. So all that to say, you know, I'm really optimistic. I think that's why we're all here today. And, you know, it's an exciting time to be in the sector as this digital transformation is not starting, but picks up pace. You know, we're certainly well into it. There are early adopters that have been active for years, but it's accelerating. And so the urgency to do this work and to continue to evolve and innovate some of the systems around it is increased. And let's not forget about that whole value chain when we do it. You know, from Emily's side, one area that we're looking to play a role is on that data literacy side. I think Bill mentioned it a number of times, and Darcy as well. Questions are left behind. Uncertainties exist. And so there's a real need to do research, but also translate that knowledge into forms that are useful and understandable to practitioners. They are not going to be experts. People who are running businesses have other concerns, but they need to be comfortable and they need to be able to operate in this environment, leverage the knowledge of experts, you know, work with their trusted advisors, and, you know, putting an investment in knowledge translation through data literacy programming is really important. And, you know, I know people involved in different parts of the system understand that in their own context and operation. And the discussion today, my last sort of comment before leaving off here is the discussion today on cooperatives, I think is equally interesting and important. If I step back just one step from that, I think it's really about innovative data institutions. Not saying the only thing we can that will be present is what already exists. Maybe there are other models, other either commercial business models, other ways of organizing the data ecosystem that can provide different options, different opportunities, maybe different opportunities for value creation. And to me, choices is a good thing. If people have the opportunity to choose one versus another, that looks a whole lot better than some of the other marketplaces that we all know marketplaces where choice is limited. We're at a point now where we can still have an influence to diversify the structure of that data ecosystem, to bring new types of actors into it. I think that's incredibly exciting. Cooperatives is one of them, but as are data trusts and a whole bunch of other different ideas. And certainly, it's real important. And I think, Canada is a big ag country, but we're also not so big and so hard to handle that we can't maybe make a dent on this and make something happen, which I think provides kind of a unique opportunity for us today, and really excited to be here and have the discussion with folks. So thanks a lot.
That was superb. Thank you to our speakers, Bill, Darcy, Dan. Please join me with saying thanks. Just a couple of things that kind of hit me. Bill really did provide, and both Darcy and Dan kept referring to this, just an excellent overview of the issues. And I like some of the questions that he's raising. Will there be property rights that will be applicable to the ag data area? This is actually a huge question. Darcy, issues of trust and simplicity and value creation at the farm level, the importance of that. And then Dan, thinking about Industry 4.0 and a data ecosystem and how we need to think about ag data in that context. And I think what also all of the speakers are getting at is we tend to think of big ag data in one, a particular dimension. But as you're going to hear from some of our speakers later today, there are thousands of small, sort of very targeted uses of data that we also need to be thinking about. So there's these big solutions that go across thousands of farmers, but there's also ones that have to be customized to a specific group. And for instance, I think when you hear from Billy Tiller this afternoon, I think he's going to be talking about some work that they're doing in Nebraska with a group of farmers along the Platte River, very, very specific data needs. It's a long ways from some of the stuff that Monsanto is doing or John Deere is doing. And so this is the thing about this particular area. It's so diverse right now. We have 20 minutes, thanks to the great efforts of our panelists on keeping on time. So big congratulations to them. We have 20 minutes for questions, and we can open this up to both the people here in the room, and I'm going to just check my phone and see if there are people online. For those of you who are online, if you think the easiest thing to do is just to type that into the chat. And Stan's
Murray, there's
tracking.
also some questions directly from the Zoom chat that I have noted here.
All right. Why don't we take one of those?
All right. There are three. I'll start with this one. Are there any opportunities or challenges in using and obtaining land-related data, such as parcel information? I don't know who wants to take on that one.
Opportunities and challenges for gaining
In using and
parcel-related.
obtaining land-related data, such as parcel information.
It sounds like the question may be directed more towards security. But in the context that we talk about it, one of the other backgrounds is I'm on the board of Farm Credit in the United States. And typically when we get questions from farmers about not wanting to have online accessibility of parcel data. Their concern is mostly from a security and confidentiality perspective, that they don't want that readily available to others, particularly not regulators. And I've been on that other side as a regulator, getting access to that data. But maybe I can shift from that question a little bit into data governance. So we have in Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Livestock Consortium, and we gather data on parcels and then on every animal walking on the state of Wisconsin, which happens to be 2 million dairy cows, among other things. And the farmers did not want the state of Wisconsin, my former employer, to have access to that data. But at the same time, we needed to know where all those animals were. So if we had, like right now, we have, unfortunately, avian influenza has entered the state of Wisconsin, which is a severe threat to our poultry industry. But we needed to know where that was. And so what we did is we created a public-private consortium, data consortium, where we collected that on-farm data, but it wasn't given to the government. We created a separate entity, a corporate body that collects this data, and then in limited fashion, they can provide the data to the government for purposes of food safety. And I just recently did this, worked with others on a project for the Executive Office of the President in Washington, D.C. on disaster preparedness and response data. But I'm not exactly sure if there's a clarification from the speaker or from the questioner on that. But I know that in many cases, farmers don't want there to be data made available on where their farm operations are, or what they have on their farm operations. And so, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is one of the things that's potentially implicated, because now that data is being readily collected, because you're sitting on your farm, your combine is communicating with the satellite, the smart devices. And so they know exactly where that combine is on the farm. Won't be very long when we won't actually need a person in that combine, because we'll be able to drive that combine without a person in there. But I don't know, I'll look to my other two speakers if they have a different perspective on that.
Yeah, it's a big question, actually. So it's tough to answer. So when I think of parcel, quote unquote, data, I think a legal land description.
Yeah.
And I know we've done a lot of work on tying all the different provincial jurisdictions, land. It's really easy, by the way, in the Dominion Land Survey. So Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, half mile by half mile squares works great. And you know, and that information is publicly accessible. So we try to make it easy for farmers to find their fields. And then every province has their own, and we're trying to piece and tie that together. So it's a challenge from a ag tech provider's perspective to get relevant information on, you know, where that field is and what the size is and all of that other information. Now, the data that's tied to those parcels, if as I have a farmer and let's say I rent some land, I don't really want my rent information shared with anybody unless I choose to share it. So I think the data tied to that parcel is what I spend most of my time on, not actually where the parcel is or what the legal description of it is.
Yeah, I think Darcy, you put your finger on sort of a classic challenge, which is like, you know, at the base of a lot of this is data that is sort of like either derived from government or semi-open, open in some jurisdictions, not in others, especially in Canada, US, where provincial and state data is, you know, highly relevant. You know, land data is a good example. And, you know, think of weather and a whole bunch of other things that you want to try to bring into the system, but that because they're heterogeneous and getting them from each of the providers is not always in the same formats and it's not always open to the same degree, that in itself is a challenge. And just one other comment very briefly, questions around land data and so on really make me think of what now is a fairly famous example of the tillable breakdown. So if you haven't heard of this case, I won't delve into it now, but you can look it up. Effectively, it was a company that used land information that was publicly available, but didn't really meet the expectations of people who were using or living on that land in terms of what was known or what could be known about their operation, about their let's say land value and so on. Long story short, it really scuttled the business. Tillable had to backtrack big time, and it was a huge disaster because they weren't clear and they did not meet the expectations that people had about this information and they felt exposed. So long story short, it really was one of the classic cautionary tales of something that's sensitive and needs to be handled carefully, and where transparency is of the utmost importance. I'm sure there's many other examples of that, but this is a real classic.
Yeah, if I can just add to that case, and this ties back to what Darcy was saying about trust. That particular case really eroded farmers' trust in this data because the feeling was that there were certain players that had access to data on particular fields, and they were then able to structure their bids accordingly. That does not go over very well. Hence a big drop in trust. Do we have somebody from the room? Yes, go ahead.
So there were several allusions to maybe the potential role of the cooperative model and the benefits and opportunities that might come in terms of trust and maybe integration and everything. I'm particularly curious what you see as the potential role of cooperative principle number 6, which is cooperation among cooperatives. So maybe cooperative networking or associations. What role do you see them playing in terms of maybe creating like data ecosystems or more integration within the system? And any examples, if you have, of like kind of more organized adoption of data systems?
I can start off with that one. From a data cooperative perspective, what we saw through the literature, through research, is that farmers have a fair amount of distrust about data, but at the same time, they very much trust their own cooperatives. So their own farm supply cooperative. So from the perspective that they're providing this information to their farm supply cooperative, they're pretty comfortable with that. They have a well-developed relationship. They can run for the board of directors. They can set policy, which policy might then relate to how that data is used. And I'll give an example. Being on the board of Farm Credit, we're the largest holder of ag data in the United States outside the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and some believe we actually hold more data than USDA. But farmers are very comfortable giving us data because we're a co-op, they own us. And we're having a pretty robust policy discussion right now within our board of directors of what we're going to do with this data. And it was just before the pandemic, about 2.5 years ago, I was in the boardroom of Thomson Reuters on Times Square, and they were talking to us about us selling our data to Thomson Reuters, which is arguably the largest holder of data generally in the world. And they asked us what our view was on that. And I said, these are our farmer owners. And unless we get their consent as owners of our cooperative to provide this data to you, we're not going to do that. And Thomson Reuters was not particularly happy. Now it's called Refinitiv. Refinitiv was not particularly happy with that response, but we felt we have a fiduciary duty to our farmer members. And before we can release that data, they have to be an explicit policy discussion with us before we go about doing that. And that's a kind of discussion that would naturally occur within a cooperative. And I think that's why farmers tend to be more trusting of cooperatives. Going to the second part of your question, we are talking to farm supply cooperatives and others about sharing data for different purposes. And that we view very, very differently. We don't have any discussions about sharing data with Bayer, for example, but with farm supply cooperatives to help to improve both the financing and the products and services that are provided to farmers. That we're very happy to have those discussions. We're having those discussions, but I think that's part of the reason why there's some receptivity among farmers to look at the idea of data cooperatives, at least so that they have some type of ability to be on par with non-cooperatively owned businesses. And so I'll stop there with my answer to that question, but I see a lot of potential.
Darcy, you're Dan? Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to just to add on to that. I think there's tons of potentials in Canada for different data co-ops. And I think the caution that I'd throw out there is when the co-op gets big enough that they're just another ag tech provider and they lose touch with their members, they're just another ag tech provider. So you have to have trust, whether you're a co-op or a privately owned company or a crown. To me, it comes down to trust and being transparent. That said, I buy my fuel from co-op and my groceries. I'm a cooperative supporter. There's that balance though. You still have to be in touch with your members.
Yeah, just maybe a couple quick reactions is, I'm not biased for myself, like one way or another, like our co-op's the unique answer. I doubt it, but I'm really excited by other ways of coming into the market. And I think that's really exciting. It, pushes the discussion forwards and will put pressure on others to explain themselves and to be clearer and to say, why is this a good model? Why is that a good model? That's really important. Like Darcy said, I think they are another provider. Whether they're a co-op or not, they will be held to the same standard. They can't take that trust for granted. They're going to have to do the same work to be transparent and to communicate and do all that good work. Like Bill was saying, you're not just going to give away your information, you consent, right? That's so important. You cannot be taken for granted. It will break down if it is. But last comment really on co-op of co-ops. That could also be interesting from a perspective of investment. If you're starting from a flat start with no software capability, you're going to need to invest significantly. So perhaps there's also an argument around getting that off the ground from a flat start may need resources from more than one organization. I don't know, but maybe there's something there as well, because it's an expensive operation to move forward on in terms of mostly human resources. It's a highly in demand type of individual that can make that happen. And I don't know, maybe there's something in that for resourcing it.
Excellent. Stan, let's take another one from online.
Okay, thanks, Murray. I'll start with this one here. Can the panelists also discuss the importance of multi-directional data sharing? It shouldn't just be an expectation that farmers share their data up the value chain and have no reciprocation from shippers, processors, retailers, etc. Insights need to be fluid. Can you speak to that?
I see both Darcy and Dan, so go ahead.
So many things could be said. I think it's a really important note that we took the perspective very much looking up the chain, but a lot of these are bi-directional or should be bi-directional relationships. Even in the most basic level, you have that retail exchange happening on inputs. There probably should be some bi-directionality there occurring in terms of information provided to the grower. But yeah, I mean, shipping is a great example, as is marketing, right? Those are areas where there's some information already occurring, but I think it'd be fair to say it could be richer in terms of helping the farm make smart decisions and know when to make a move in the marketplace or get the trucks out and so on. So I think that's really smart. And the more we build out the ecosystem and the more we can build out bi-directional links, the more likely I think that we'll have that shared value created.
Yeah, Dan said it well. There's use cases that it's one direction. There's use cases that is bi-directional. I think what matters is the value chain and making sure that any participant, whether the data goes one ways or both ways or it's circular, they understand how their data is being used and who has it and who's using it.
And I would just add that a lot of farmers do want the data on their farm operations because they want to know where the best land is, what the weather can, using drone technology, looking at their fields and understanding what pests are where and where they need to provide or put in an insecticide. But at the same time, farmers are saying that some of the recommendations they're getting from their input providers based off of that data, in many cases they find aren't particularly accurate. So some attention needs to be paid towards the quality of the recommendations being made off of that data as well.
I think one thing we didn't say out here yet today was this all costs money and time.
It does.
So we can't just get into the business of collecting data for fun because it's available, because it exists. There needs to be a business case and farmers in particular, but others running small businesses are always time poor individuals. They have 16 problems and I'm sure it's more than that, but 4 are real burning important ones. So, I think if we're talking about bi-directional data coming back into the farm, best to focus on the ones that are the burning issues rather than more peripheral items, and there'll be more action there, I'm sure.
We're getting lots and lots of questions, so we're going to go into the rapid fire round here. We've got one here, and then we're going to take a couple online, and let's see how quickly we can.
Stan's running with the microphone.
Sorry, just I want to thank you guys all for coming, and I was wondering, Bill, if you could talk a little bit more about the idea of who owns that actual data and the property rights to it. When I've got a piece of technology in my tractor, am I essentially just being a taxi service for that piece of technology, collecting data for another company, or am I actually actively creating data? And if that's the case, should I, in that sense, own that the rights to that data?
It's a great question, hard to answer in a lightning round. What I'll just say is it's pretty clear that a farmer has a property right in their own data being produced on their farm. But I don't want to say there's no value there, but the real value is in that data being collected, aggregated, and then through machine learning and artificial intelligence, new data is being collected that hedge funds are using to purchase farmland, for example, that type of thing in competition against farmers. And that's where a lot of the property rights discussion comes in, is who really owns that aggregated data. I think from a very superficial perspective, Bayer owns the data that they have that's aggregated, but they really only own the aggregation. They don't really own the underlying data. And this is where it gets complicated, because you have a separation of some traditional legal concepts here. And if we had more time, I'd go into that in greater detail, but it gets complicated. And the courts have not weighed in on this yet.
So this is something to follow up at the break.
Yeah.
Who's next? Sir?
I hope I did okay with that. Perfect.
Better you than the rest of us.
I think I'm just making a comment as somebody who has actually released software out there that collects data from farmers. I'm feeling very discouraged. This is very similar to talking about innovation and seed and how that has helped. When we look at shared value, that shared value is not equitable. What's saving farmers pennies is making companies dollars. I think things like using data agreements in simple language just tell you how screwed you are in simple language. So it's there. And when we talk about, combines being controlled by satellites, I mean, this really is a very, very strong move towards an absolute commodification of farmland.
Autonomous.
For us. So, I mean, the more we become reliant on data, the less we become reliant on our connection to the land and our ability to manage that land through our skill. And that just means a big shift of power to the people who have that data. And data in aggregate form is where it's useful. So the raw data needs to get there, but it's analyzing that data that makes it useful. So, I mean, I'm conflicted, but as I really love data, but this is just going to go the way of seed and the loss of farmers on the thing. So.
Thank you. This in the review that we did, that Bill was talking about, the issue that you've just outlined came up over and over again, and I've heard it expressed quite often. And I think for all of you that are sort of thinking about this, this is one of the issues that does need to be addressed. Let's see if we can squeeze one more question in from the online group.
Okay, this one here, along the same themes, who manages large data sets and for whose benefit? For instance, there is a proliferation of private companies chasing soil carbon, and government policies seems to be lagging, not putting a strong public policy frame around it. What do you think the public sector's role should be?
Okay, rapid fire.
Lightning round? Well, if you look at the two most active companies in agriculture, they're Google and Amazon Web Services, not exactly traditional agricultural names. But if you look at most of the companies that are offering technology, Amazon and Google are behind that technology. And they're the ones that are typically invited to the table. And to some degree, they're capturing a fair amount of the value of that ag data aggregation. What should the public policy role? I think from the University of Saskatchewan's perspective, and I think from my co-panelists, we want to make sure farmers get value out of this. And that's, I think, what our real focus is our data co-ops or whatever happens to be chosen, is that a way to give farmers on somewhat of a competitive playing field and some ability to monetize the value of the data, meaning bringing farmers together, aggregating together, getting their own recommendations together that they don't have to rely on and purchase from others who may or may not have any interest in their farming operation. That's my lightning answer.
And just to add on briefly, the public policy discussion, at least in Canada, and it's true elsewhere, is dominated by questions around privacy, which is a personal data issue, not a business data issue, at least in Canada. And it has been fast moving since the release of the data charter. The various trials and tribulations around big tech regulation and the platform economy has hugely changed the narrative. And where we were 2 years ago is not where we're going to end up by my estimation. So in terms of where does farming fit into it, we need to make sure it fits in at all. Otherwise, the whole thing will be around discussions about Google and Facebook and the consumer internet and personal privacy, and less about some of these other issues. So in the public policy discourse, the work needs to be done from our sector to make sure that it is part of the discussion around digital regulation and digital legislation, because right now it is not a highly active part of that, at least in Canada.
Excellent. You guys are doing a great job on the lightning. If you will indulge me, I will take another question from the online group.
Hey, rapid fire continues. Question is, farming, like all parts of the value chain, doesn't operate perfectly, and there is a fear that exposing data will reveal the imperfections and provide the wrong message to consumers or branding. How do we share data openly with a fickle consumer without jeopardizing farmer reputations in this imperfect sector, despite continuous improvement?
I can take a stab at this one. I think there's sort of two maybe channels. Yes, there's the highly granular channel where farmers are in a direct relationship with consumers. And of course, a farmer might choose not to be in that or not. It's hardly going to be a mandated situation, at least at this juncture. But, a project that I've been engaged in a little bit that speaks to some of that here in Canada it's called the Ag Index, National Agri-Food Index. The idea is to try to pull up some more aggregated information about the performance of the sector on the environmental and sustainability aspects, so that it's visible to consumers at a higher level and doesn't necessarily put any one operation into a spotlight and create that sort of challenge that as someone is continuing to improve, there might be a direct scrutiny involved, but at the same time you're able to show where the sector is headed as a whole. So I think there's a lot that can be done that is at a higher level, which is so much better than what we get from current national statistics, which are basically produced every 5 years or published every 5 years. That doesn't really respond to the consumer. So maybe there's a middle ground that we're plumbing through this Agri-Food Index project that can service that space, and happy to talk more about it with anyone who's interested.
Yeah, my theory is that the data will paint a better picture than somebody sitting in an office tower in downtown Toronto pictures without it. So I do think, especially in Canada, we have the most sustainable, the most skilled farmers in the world. I think we have a great story to tell. And I hope that, we can get together as an industry and tell it, because I truly think this country leads a lot on different factors and different sectors of agriculture and safety and sustainability and everything else that consumers are concerned about right now. And I think data can help tell that story.
And if you don't tell it, other competitors may tell it for you.
And in the United States in particular, know your farmer is very, very important to consumers. They want to know the farmer that produced their fruits, vegetables, or whatever. And farmers are really embracing that concept because they realize rather than getting in front of it, trying to stop it, it's better to embrace it and actually work with it. And so we see farmers across at least the upper Midwest that are not as uncomfortable as they were in the past. I hate to put it in that kind of backhanded negative way, but they're not as uncomfortable as they've been in the past in sharing information like that. Where was the product produced? How was it produced? And we've been strongly encouraging farmers as state regulators and then as ag trade associations to invite the public on the farms. And if you've never visited a dairy farm north of Indianapolis, that is the largest, and you're going to laugh at this, but the largest tourist site in the state of Indiana is a dairy farm north of Indianapolis. And again, I think it's almost 1 million visitors a year through that dairy farm. It's called Fair Oaks, and they processed milk, and it's available on grocery stores across most of the United States. And so that's not something we did 10 years ago, but I think farmers are really embracing that now.
We've still got, thank you. We've still got another question, but I think it's time to close this session up. There is a question from online that I will get the presenters to answer online. So for the rest of you, you can check into Whova and check out the answer. Couple of things. The next session, so we're going to break here till 10:30. The next session back in this room where we're going to be talking in more depth about the voluntary codes of conduct that Bill introduced and Darcy talked a little bit about. And you'll find out what's been going on in the United States, New Zealand, as well as some of the initiatives that are going to be happening here in Canada. So that's coming up at 10:30. And finally, let's thank our presenters one more time.